My father looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're worthless, Maya. A complete failure who couldn't even finish what she started." I sat there watching him toast my brother's promotion to Space Force captain, surrounded by ribbons and commendations that would never bear my name. What he didn't know was that in 72 hours my brother's commanding officer would look directly at me and say the words that would shatter everything. "Ma'am, you're the space operations chief?" The silence that followed my father's words. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Felt heavier than the Colorado mountain air pressing against the windows of our family home. Colonel Marcus Chen, my father, had never been one to mince words, but tonight his disappointment cut deeper than usual. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier to deflect. He was resigned, like he'd finally accepted that his eldest daughter was nothing more than a cautionary tale. "Look at your brother," he continued, gesturing toward Dylan, who sat uncomfortably in his pristine Space Force dress uniform. 26 years old, and already commanding satellite operations at Peterson Space Force Base. "And you?" His eyes swept over me dismissively. 32 and working the night shift at a warehouse. "You had every opportunity I could give you, Maya. Full scholarship to the Air Force Academy. Top of your class in aerospace engineering. And you threw it all away." I stared down at my plate, the celebratory dinner for Dylan's promotion turning to ash in my mouth. Around the dining room, the walls told the story of our family's military legacy. Photos of my father in his various commands, my grandfather's Vietnam service medals, my uncle's Navy Cross from Desert Storm. 3 generations of Chen family honor, displayed like a museum of duty and sacrifice. And then there was the gap, the space where my accomplishments should have been, conspicuously empty. Dylan shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with being used as a weapon against me. "Dad, maybe we don't need to." "No, son, she needs to hear this." My father's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years commanding troops. Maya walked away from everything. Left the academy 2 months before graduation with no explanation, no honor, no dignity, just gone. Like everything we taught her meant nothing. My stepmother, Patricia, tried to lighten the mood. "Marcus, it's Dylan's night. Let's focus on celebrating." "This is about celebrating," he interrupted. "Celebrating the son who understood that duty means something, the one who didn't abandon his family's legacy for God knows what reason." He turned back to me, his weathered face etched with years of disappointment. "I used to tell people I had 2 children in the military. Now I tell them I have 1 son serving and 1 daughter who works nights." The shame in his voice was unmistakable. I was the family's secret, the disappointment they didn't discuss at military functions or reunions, the daughter who'd somehow lost her way and never found it again. Dylan finally spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. "Dad, you don't know the whole story. Maybe there's more to—" "There's nothing more to know," my father cut him off. "She quit, simple as that. Quit when things got tough, and she's been quitting ever since. Some people just aren't built for service, Dylan. They're built for whatever this is." I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I should go." "Yes," my father said without looking up. "You probably should." As I gathered my jacket, I caught Dylan's apologetic glance, but I couldn't meet his eyes. He was everything our father had hoped for. Decorated, respected, following in the family footsteps with honor. And I was exactly what my father believed, a failure who'd walked away from everything that mattered. If only he knew the truth about why I'd really left the academy. If only any of them knew what I'd been doing for the past decade, while they assumed I was lost. But some secrets were classified above their clearance level, and some sacrifices were too dangerous to explain, even to family. What my father didn't know, what none of them could know, was that I hadn't quit the Air Force Academy in disgrace. I'd been recruited by something that didn't officially exist. 2 months before graduation, a woman in a plain gray suit had approached me after my advanced orbital mechanics class. She'd shown me credentials that made my father's colonel rank look like a playground badge. National Reconnaissance Office. The name alone carried weight that could crush careers or create legends. "Cadet Chen," she'd said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who moved in shadows deeper than any uniform could reach. Your thesis on predictive satellite trajectory analysis caught our attention. We have a proposition that will require you to make a choice. You can graduate with honors, follow the traditional path, and maybe command a satellite squadron in 10 years. Or you can disappear from this path entirely and help us build the future of space-based intelligence operations. The choice was simple: visible mediocrity or invisible excellence. I chose the shadows. For the past decade, while my family thought I was drifting aimlessly through minimum-wage jobs, I'd been operating under deep cover as a space operations chief for a classified program that didn't appear on any organizational chart. My official title was buried in budget lines marked only as Special Activities Division. My real job was coordinating intelligence satellites that tracked everything from missile launches to terrorist communications across 6 continents. The warehouse job was my cover. Third shift, minimal supervision, perfect for someone who needed to slip away for encrypted briefings and satellite coordination sessions. While other employees stocked shelves, I monitored space-based assets worth more than most countries' entire defense budgets. My apartment looked like any other struggling 30-something's place: cheap furniture, outdated electronics, bills stacked on a second-hand table. But hidden behind a false wall in my bedroom closet was a secure communication center that connected me directly to NORAD, the Pentagon, and 3 different intelligence agencies. The laptop that looked like a generic hand-me-down contained encryption software that could start or prevent wars. The irony was devastating. My father spent his career commanding troops he could see, leading missions with clear objectives and measurable outcomes. I spent mine commanding assets he'd never know existed, preventing conflicts that would never make the news precisely because they'd been stopped before they could begin. Last month, while Dylan was receiving praise for successfully coordinating a routine satellite maintenance operation, I'd spent 72 hours straight managing the orbital repositioning of 6 classified reconnaissance platforms to monitor a potential nuclear weapons transfer in Eastern Europe. The operation prevented what intelligence estimates suggested could have been a dirty bomb attack on a major European city. My family would never know that their failure daughter had helped save potentially hundreds of thousands of lives. The warehouse workers knew me as Maya, the quiet night shift worker who kept to herself. My coworkers at the NRO knew me as Chief Chen, the youngest space operations chief in the program's history. To my family, I was an embarrassment. To my country's most classified operations, I was indispensable. But the cost of that secret was sitting in my father's house, watching him celebrate the son who'd achieved visible success while mourning the daughter who'd chosen invisible service. Every medal Dylan earned felt like vindication of my father's disappointment. Every family gathering became a reminder of the choice I'd made to let them believe I'd failed rather than reveal the truth about what I'd actually become. Some sacrifices are measured in blood, others are measured in the love of people who can never understand why you made them. 3 days after the disastrous family dinner, I was deep into my night shift at Morrison Distribution Center when my encrypted phone buzzed with a priority alert. The message was brief but urgent. Chinese reconnaissance satellite experiencing anomalous behavior. Potential collision course with ISS. Need immediate trajectory analysis. Classification level, cosmic. I glanced around the warehouse. My supervisor, Janet, was in her office watching Netflix. The other night, workers were scattered across the facility, focused on their own tasks. Perfect cover for what I needed to do. I slipped into the maintenance storage room and activated my secure laptop. The classified network connection established immediately, pulling me into a crisis that was unfolding 250 miles above Earth. The Chinese satellite, officially a weather monitoring platform, had suddenly altered its orbit and was now on a potential intercept course with the International Space Station. The data streaming across my screen painted a terrifying picture. Impact probability was climbing by the hour. The ISS crew had been quietly alerted and were preparing for potential evacuation procedures, but with 6 astronauts currently aboard, including 2 American crew members, the window for safe departure was rapidly closing. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I pulled up trajectory modeling software that didn't exist in any public database. This was the kind of crisis that could spark an international incident, or worse, if the satellite's true purpose was what our intelligence suggested, its destruction near the ISS could release debris patterns that would cripple orbital operations for decades. I had 47 minutes to solve what 3 different agencies had been working on for 6 hours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The problem wasn't just mathematical, it was political. The Chinese satellite had malfunctioned at precisely the right moment to gather intelligence on a classified ISS experiment. Our response needed to neutralize the threat without revealing that we knew the satellite's true capabilities. I ran 17 different scenario models, each one painting increasingly grim outcomes. Direct intervention would expose our own classified orbital assets. Diplomatic channels would take too long. The ISS crew couldn't maneuver aggressively without potentially destabilizing their own orbit. Then I saw it, a solution so elegant it was almost invisible. I could use gravitational influence from 3 of our own reconnaissance satellites to create a slight orbital perturbation. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would look intentional. Just enough to nudge the Chinese satellite into a slightly higher orbit that would miss the ISS by a comfortable margin, while appearing to be a natural correction to its malfunction. The plan required precise timing and coordination between assets that weren't supposed to acknowledge each other's existence. I would need to orchestrate a ballet of classified satellites, each making minor adjustments that would collectively solve the crisis without anyone realizing they'd been solved. I submitted my solution through encrypted channels and waited. 12 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Plan approved. Execute immediately. Outstanding work, Chief. But in my rush to save the ISS, I'd made a critical error. I'd forgotten to log out of my secure terminal properly. When I returned to the warehouse floor, my laptop was still running the trajectory analysis software, its classified interface clearly visible to anyone who might glance at the maintenance room. Janet knocked on the door 5 minutes later. "Maya, you've been in there for over an hour. Everything okay?" I quickly closed the laptop, but not before she caught a glimpse of something that didn't belong in a warehouse worker's toolkit: satellite tracking displays, orbital mechanics calculations, and a communication interface marked with warning labels about unauthorized access carrying federal penalties. "What was that?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Just personal project stuff," I stammered, knowing how weak it sounded. Janet had been a logistics coordinator in the Army for 15 years before taking the warehouse supervisor job. She'd seen enough classified material to recognize it when she saw it. Her expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion. "Maya, I need to ask you something directly. What exactly do you do during your breaks?" I met her eyes, weighing my options. Janet was smart, observant, and now suspicious. She'd also just witnessed me operating equipment that no warehouse worker should have access to. "I can't explain," I said quietly. "Can't or won't?" "Can't." She stared at me for a long moment, processing implications that could either destroy my cover or create an ally I hadn't expected. "Well," she said finally, "I guess some people have more interesting hobbies than others." But I could see in her eyes that she knew this was bigger than hobbies. Much bigger. The next morning, Janet didn't mention our encounter, but I caught her watching me differently. She'd nod when I passed her office, but her eyes held questions she couldn't voice. During our brief shift overlap, she'd make small talk about my computer skills, with the kind of casual tone that felt anything but casual. "You know, Maya," she said on Thursday morning as I was clocking out, "I've been thinking about upgrading our inventory system. Maybe you could take a look at it sometime? You seem to know your way around complex software." I managed a non-committal response, but her message was clear. She was testing the waters, trying to understand what she'd seen without directly challenging my cover. What I didn't know was that Janet had military contacts of her own. That same afternoon, while I was sleeping off my night shift, Janet made a phone call to her old Army logistics unit. She'd kept in touch with several former colleagues who'd transitioned into different roles, including one who now worked security clearance investigations for the Department of Defense. "Hey Sarah, it's Janet Morrison. I need to ask you something off the record," she began, settling into her office chair. "If someone was operating classified equipment without authorization, what would that look like?" Her friend Sarah Martinez had spent 8 years investigating security breaches before taking a civilian position with the DoD. "That's oddly specific, Jan. What's going on?" Janet described what she'd seen: the satellite displays, the orbital mechanics calculations, the secure communication interface. She was careful not to name me directly, but painted a clear picture of someone with access to systems that didn't belong in civilian hands. "Jesus, Janet," Sarah said after a long pause. "That's not just classified, that sounds like national reconnaissance level stuff. Either someone's conducting espionage, or what? Or they're supposed to have that access and they're working under deep cover." Meanwhile, at Peterson Space Force Base, Dylan was experiencing his own moment of confusion. He'd been assigned to review routine coordination reports from various satellite operations, including some involving orbital adjustments that had occurred earlier in the week. The Chinese satellite incident had been classified, but Dylan's clearance level gave him access to the operational summaries. What puzzled him wasn't the incident itself. Satellite near misses weren't uncommon, but the solution methodology listed in the after-action report. The trajectory analysis showed a level of sophistication that impressed even the seasoned space operations officers. Whoever had solved the crisis had used a technique called gravitational herding, a theoretical concept that most satellite operators knew about but few could execute in real time. Captain Chen, his commanding officer, Colonel Rebecca Shaw, called him into her office. "You've been reviewing the orbital incident reports. Notice anything interesting?" Dylan looked up from his tablet. "The solution was brilliant, ma'am. Whoever coordinated those satellite adjustments prevented a potential international crisis without leaving any fingerprints. It's exactly the kind of thinking they taught us was possible but rarely executable." Colonel Shaw nodded slowly. "The technique used gravitational herding. It's not widely known. In fact, there are maybe a dozen people in the country with the theoretical knowledge and practical clearance to execute something like that." She pulled up a classified personnel roster on her screen. "We've been trying to identify who coordinated the response. The operation required someone with access to multiple satellite networks, advanced orbital mechanics expertise, and real-time decision-making authority." Dylan studied the list of names and clearance levels. These are all senior operations chiefs and intelligence analysts. Most of them have been doing this for decades. "Exactly. Which makes the age and experience profile interesting." Colonel Shaw highlighted several entries. "The person who solved this crisis demonstrated knowledge that typically takes 15 to 20 years to develop, but the operational style suggests someone younger, more adaptable." She paused, studying Dylan's expression. "Captain, I need you to run a background check on something for me. I want you to look into anyone with previous Air Force Academy training who might have transitioned into classified satellite operations. Someone who left traditional tracks but stayed in the system." Dylan felt an odd chill. "Any particular time frame, ma'am?" "Focus on Academy cadets from about 10 years ago. People who might have been recruited into programs that don't appear on standard career progression charts." That evening, as Dylan began his research, he kept thinking about the conversation he'd had with his father about Maya, about her leaving the academy without explanation, about her mysterious decade of drifting between jobs, about how someone with her academic background and aerospace engineering knowledge might have skills that a family dinner couldn't reveal. 300 miles away, Janet was having coffee with Sarah Martinez, who'd driven down from Denver specifically for this conversation. "I ran some discreet inquiries," Sarah said, keeping her voice low. "The good news is your warehouse worker isn't on any watch lists for unauthorized access. The concerning news is that the equipment she was using, it's only issued to personnel with cosmic clearance." Janet nearly choked on her coffee. Cosmic? Above top secret. The kind of clearance that requires background investigations going back to your kindergarten teachers. Sarah leaned forward. "Janet, either your employee is the most dangerous security breach in decades, or she's exactly who she's supposed to be." Dylan stared at his computer screen for the third time that morning, unable to believe what the personnel database was telling him. According to the classified records, there was indeed a Maya Chen listed in the National Reconnaissance Office's Special Activities Division. The file was heavily redacted, but the basic information was clear. She'd been recruited directly from the Air Force Academy 10 years ago and held one of the highest security clearances in the intelligence community. The same Maya Chen who lived in a cramped apartment and worked night shifts at a warehouse. His sister. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He thought about every family gathering, every disappointed look from their father, every moment he'd felt guilty for his own success while Maya struggled. All of it built on a lie. Not Maya's lie, but their collective failure to understand what classified service actually meant. Dylan's hands trembled as he reached for his secure phone. He needed to verify what he was seeing, but protocol demanded he work through proper channels. He called Colonel Shaw. "Ma'am, I need to request a meeting about the orbital incident investigation. There's been a development." An hour later, Dylan sat across from Colonel Shaw in her secured office, trying to find words for what he'd discovered. "Colonel, I believe I know who coordinated the satellite response." Shaw leaned forward. "Go ahead, Captain." "It's my sister, ma'am, Maya Chen. She's listed as a Space Operations Chief in the NRO Special Activities Division." The silence that followed felt eternal. Colonel Shaw's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something that looked like recognition. "Captain Chen, I need you to understand something about classified operations. If your sister is who you think she is, then her cover identity is critical to national security. This conversation doesn't leave this room." Dylan nodded, but his mind was reeling. "Ma'am, my family thinks she's a failure. My father called her worthless just last week. We've been treating her like she's some kind of disappointment for 10 years. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own crisis at home. My encrypted phone had been buzzing all morning with increasingly urgent messages about a security review. Someone had been asking questions about my background, running searches that triggered automatic alerts within the intelligence community. I knew the investigation had to be connected to my mistake at the warehouse, but I didn't know how close it was getting to my family until Dylan called me that afternoon. "Maya, we need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere private?" There was something in his voice, not the casual warmth I was used to, but the careful tone of someone carrying classified information. My stomach dropped. "What's this about, Dylan?" "Just meet me at Riverside Park, the pavilion near the duck pond. And Maya, come alone." I arrived first, choosing a picnic table that gave me clear sightlines in all directions. When Dylan appeared, he was out of uniform, but walking with the purposeful stride of someone on official business. He carried a manila folder that he set on the table between us without opening it. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I kept my expression neutral, but my pulse was racing. "Okay. Are you who I think you are?" The question hung in the air between us. I could deflect, lie, maintain my cover like I'd been trained. Or I could trust the brother who'd always defended me, even when he didn't understand what he was defending. "Dylan, there are things I can't." "Maya." He opened the folder and showed me a printed page with my NRO personnel record, heavily redacted but unmistakably mine. "I know what this is. I know what it means." My world tilted. The careful separation I'd maintained between my two lives was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "How did you?" "The satellite incident. The Chinese near miss with the ISS. The solution methodology was brilliant, but it was also distinctive. We've been trying to identify who coordinated the response." I stared at the document, seeing my classified identity reflected in my brother's eyes. 10 years of carefully maintained separation destroyed by a moment of professional excellence. "Dylan, if you know what this is, then you know why I couldn't tell you." "I know why you couldn't tell me," he said quietly. "But Maya, Dad thinks you're a complete failure. He's been carrying guilt about you for years, thinking he's somehow failed as a father." The weight of that revelation crushed me. I'd thought I was protecting my family by letting them think less of me. Instead, I'd been destroying my father's faith in himself. Dylan and I agreed to meet again the next day, but what we didn't know was that events were already in motion that would make our careful family reconciliation impossible. Colonel Shaw had been in contact with NRO leadership since Dylan's revelation. The security investigation triggered by Janet's inquiries had already flagged my cover as potentially compromised. Now, with Dylan's discovery, the intelligence community faced a delicate problem: how to extract me from a blown operation without confirming the existence of programs that officially didn't exist. The solution they chose was both elegant and terrifying. We're going to create a controlled exposure scenario, my handler, Director Sarah Voss, explained during an emergency secure briefing. Your brother's promotion ceremony is in 3 days. It's the perfect opportunity to resolve this cleanly. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ma'am, my entire family will be there, my father, my stepmother. Which is precisely why it will work. We need a public forum where your identity can be revealed in a way that appears accidental but is actually completely controlled. Director Voss pulled up a detailed operational plan on her secure tablet. Captain Chen has been instructed to invite Colonel Shaw to the ceremony as his commanding officer. She'll be there in an official capacity. You're gonna blow my cover in front of my family? We're gonna save your cover by changing it. The warehouse operation was always meant to be temporary. We have a new assignment for you, one that allows you to work more openly while maintaining necessary security protocols. The plan was more complex than I'd initially understood. Dylan had been read into a limited version of my operational history, but only enough to understand why the revelation needed to happen in a controlled environment. He'd been instructed to ensure that our father attended the ceremony and to seat our family in a specific section of the auditorium. Meanwhile, Janet had been contacted by NRO security personnel. The conversation was brief and left her with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Whatever she'd seen, she needed to forget it had ever happened. Her military background meant she understood the implications without needing detailed explanations. Maya's a good worker, Janet told the security officer. Whatever she's involved in, I hope she stays safe. The trap was set for Friday afternoon at Peterson Space Force Base. Dylan's promotion to major would be a small ceremony, attended by base personnel and family members. Colonel Shaw would preside, and several other senior officers would be present. According to the operational plan, everything would proceed normally until the moment Shaw called out my presence in the audience. The NRO had created a cover story. I was being honored for civilian contributions to space operations security. It was vague enough to avoid revealing classified details, while providing justification for my public recognition. My father would finally learn that his daughter hadn't failed. She'd succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. But I wasn't prepared for the emotional complexity of the situation. Thursday night I sat in my apartment, staring at the carefully prepared biography that would replace my warehouse worker identity. After 10 years of invisibility, I was about to become visible again. After a decade of letting my family think I was worthless, I was about to prove them wrong in the most public way possible. The phone rang at 11 p.m. Dylan's voice was tight with stress. Maya, I need to warn you about something. Dad's been talking about the ceremony all week. He's proud of me, but he keeps mentioning how he wishes you were more like me. Tomorrow is going to destroy everything he thinks he knows. I know. Are you ready for that? I looked around my sparse apartment, at the life I'd built on secrecy and sacrifice. Tomorrow, I would have to watch my father's face as he realized that everything he believed about his daughter was wrong. That every disappointment he'd expressed, every moment of shame he'd felt about my choices, had been based on a lie I'd been required to maintain. No, I said honestly. I don't think anyone could be ready for this. Maya? For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you really are. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my emotional state. I dressed carefully, not in the warehouse uniform my family expected, but in professional attire appropriate for someone about to be publicly recognized for classified service. I drove to Peterson Space Force Base, knowing that in a few hours, my 10-year cover would be officially terminated. The ceremony would change everything. The Peterson Space Force Base auditorium was smaller than I'd expected, but every seat was filled with dress uniforms and formal attire. I sat in the back corner, exactly where Dylan had instructed, wearing a navy blazer that felt foreign after years of warehouse uniforms. My father sat 3 rows ahead with Patricia, his posture rigid with military pride as he watched his son prepare to receive his promotion. Colonel Shaw stood at the podium, her voice carrying easily through the room as she began the ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to recognize excellence in space operations and the dedication required to protect our nation's interests beyond Earth's atmosphere. Dylan looked confident as he stood at attention, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders. He knew what was coming, even if the exact timing remained uncertain. The promotion proceeded normally. Dylan stepped forward as Shaw read the citation for his advancement to major, highlighting his leadership in satellite coordination and his potential for greater responsibility. My father's chest swelled with visible pride, and I felt a pang of the old familiar pain, watching my family celebrate achievements I could never claim. Shaw pinned the new rank insignia on Dylan's uniform, and the audience applauded. For a moment, I thought perhaps the NRO had changed their minds, that I would leave this ceremony with my cover intact, and my family still believing their version of Maya Chen. Then Shaw's voice cut through the applause. Before we conclude today's ceremony, I'd like to acknowledge some special guests who have contributed to the success of our space operations mission. The room settled into attentive silence. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Space operations require coordination between multiple agencies and personnel at every level of classification. Sometimes our most critical contributors work behind the scenes, in positions that allow them to serve without recognition. Shaw's eyes found mine across the room. Today I want to publicly acknowledge one such contributor. My father shifted in his seat, probably wondering why the ceremony was continuing. Would Maya Chen please stand? The sound of my name in that formal context sent electricity through the room. My father's head snapped around, confusion written across his face as he located me in the back corner. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, aware that every eye in the auditorium was now focused on me. Shaw continued, her voice gaining authority. Maya Chen has served with distinction as a Space Operations Chief with the National Reconnaissance Office's Special Activities Division for the past 10 years. Her work coordinating classified satellite operations has been instrumental in preventing international conflicts and protecting American assets in orbit. The silence was deafening. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. Patricia's mouth fell open. Dylan stood at attention, but I could see the relief in his expression that the secret was finally out. Ms. Chen's recent coordination during a critical orbital incident potentially saved the International Space Station and prevented an international crisis. Her expertise in gravitational trajectory analysis and real-time satellite coordination represents the highest standards of space operations excellence. Shaw's voice carried to every corner of the room. Maya Chen, please come forward. The walk down that aisle felt infinite. Every step took me further from the daughter my father thought he knew and closer to the woman I'd actually become. The dress uniforms blurred past me, but I kept my eyes focused on Shaw, using her steady presence as an anchor. When I reached the front, Shaw extended her hand. On behalf of the United States Space Force and our partners in the intelligence community, thank you for your service. The handshake was firm, professional, but I could see approval in her eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Shaw announced, Space Operations Chief Maya Chen. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it felt distant and surreal. I turned to face the audience and immediately found my father's eyes. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pride, not disappointment, but complete and utter shock, as if he was seeing me for the first time in his life. My 10-year cover was officially dead. My real life had just begun. The reception following the ceremony was chaos, barely contained by military protocol. Officers approached me with congratulations and questions I couldn't fully answer, while my family stood frozen in a bubble of shock 20 feet away. I caught glimpses of my father through the crowd, his face cycling between confusion, anger, and something that looked like grief. Dylan materialized at my elbow, still wearing his new major's insignia. How are you holding up? I feel like I'm watching someone else's life unfold, I replied, accepting another handshake from a colonel I'd never met who somehow knew details about operations I'd coordinated. Dad hasn't moved from that spot in 20 minutes, Dylan observed. I think he's trying to process the fact that everything he believed about you was wrong. Colonel Shaw approached us, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal concern. Chief Chen, you'll need to report for operational debriefing Monday morning. Your cover transition will require extensive documentation. What does that mean for my family, ma'am? They'll be briefed on the basics, enough to understand why secrecy was necessary, not enough to compromise ongoing operations. Your father will need to sign non-disclosure agreements, but he'll finally have context for your choices. Through the crowd, I saw Patricia trying to guide my father toward the exit, but he kept stopping to stare back at me. The weight of 10 years of misunderstanding seemed to have physically bent him. This wasn't the triumphant revelation I'd imagined during lonely nights at the warehouse. This was a man confronting the reality that he'd spent a decade mourning a daughter who had never actually failed. The drive home was silent. Dylan had offered to talk to our father first, to help bridge the gap between the daughter he'd known and the operative he'd just discovered. But I knew that conversation had to happen between us, without intermediaries or explanations filtered through military protocols. I waited 3 hours before driving to my father's house. Patricia answered the door, her eyes red from crying. "Maya, I don't know what to say to you," she whispered. "All these years we thought—" "I know what you thought. It's what I needed you to think. Marcus is in his study. He's been sitting there since we got home, just staring at your academy photo, the one from before you left." I found him exactly as Patricia had described, holding the framed photograph from my cadet days. The young woman in the picture looked confident, purposeful, unbroken by the weight of secrets she didn't yet know she'd have to carry. "Dad?" He looked up and I saw that he'd been crying. Colonel Marcus Chen, 30 years of military command, tears streaming down his face. "I called you worthless," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told people my daughter was a failure." I sat across from him, the distance feeling vast despite the small room. "You said what you needed to say based on what you knew. But Maya, I should have known. I should have seen." He set the photograph down with trembling hands. "A space operations chief, 10 years of classified service. And I've been carrying guilt, thinking I somehow failed you as a father. You didn't fail me. I failed to understand that when someone disappears from view, it doesn't mean they've disappeared from purpose." He looked directly at me for the first time since the ceremony. "How many lives have you saved that I'll never know about?" "Dad, I can't." "I'm not asking for details. I'm asking you to help me understand how to be proud of a daughter whose achievements I'm not allowed to know." The question hung between us, heavy with 10 years of missed connections and misunderstood sacrifices. "You can be proud of the choice I made to serve, even when that service required you to think less of me," I said finally. "You raised me to put duty before recognition. I just took that lesson further than you expected." He was quiet for a long time, processing the reversal of everything he thought he knew about his family. "Patricia keeps asking if we can tell people. Our friends, her sister, the neighbors who've watched us worry about you for years." "Some of it, yes. But Dad, most of my work will always be classified. You'll have to be proud of me without fully understanding what you're proud of. Like being proud of a ghost. Like being proud of someone who chooses to be invisible so others can live safely in the light." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't disappointment. It was the beginning of understanding. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my father called and asked if I wanted to have dinner. Not a family gathering, not a celebration. Just the two of us, trying to rebuild a relationship that had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding. We met at a quiet restaurant near the base, far from the warehouse where I'd spent years hiding in plain sight. My father looked older somehow, as if learning the truth about my life had forced him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about parenting, duty, and sacrifice. "I've been thinking about something you said," he began after we'd ordered, "about choosing to serve even when that service required me to think less of you." I nodded, waiting. "I spent 30 years in uniform, Maya. I thought I understood sacrifice. But my sacrifices were visible. Deployments my family knew about. Missions I could discuss in general terms. Medals I could wear with pride." He paused, struggling with words. "Your sacrifice was letting the people you loved think you'd failed. That's a kind of strength I never had to develop. Different missions require different kinds of strength, Dad." Dylan helped me understand some of it. "The security briefing they gave me was limited, but enough to know that your work prevented conflicts that could have killed thousands of people." His voice carried a mixture of pride and regret. "And I spent 10 years thinking you were wasting your potential at a warehouse." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Dad, you couldn't have known, that was the point. If my own family had suspected what I was really doing, my cover would have been compromised from the beginning." "But the cost, Maya." The cost of letting us believe you'd failed. The cost of you knowing the truth would have been higher, not just for me, but for the operations I was supporting, for the people whose lives depended on maintaining that fiction. He was quiet for a long time, processing the implications. Patricia wants to tell her sister. She's been defending you for years against family members who thought you were throwing your life away. She can tell her some of it now, that I work in aerospace security, that my job requires discretion. But Dad, most of what I do will always be classified. How do I explain 10 years of being wrong about my own daughter? The pain in his voice was raw, unfiltered. This was a man who'd built his identity on understanding military service, on reading people and situations correctly. Learning that he'd completely misread his own child had shaken him to his core. You don't explain it, I said gently. You accept that sometimes good parents make decisions based on incomplete information. You raised me to value service over recognition. I just applied that lesson in ways you couldn't see. Over the following weeks, our relationship slowly began to rebuild. My father started calling more often, not to check on my problems, but to simply talk. Patricia invited me to dinner without the underlying tension that had characterized family gatherings for years. Dylan became the bridge between my two worlds, helping our father understand the parts of my work that could be discussed while respecting the boundaries that had to remain in place. The most surprising change was in how my father talked about duty and service. During one conversation, he told me about a young officer under his command who was struggling with a classified assignment. I told him something you taught me, Dad said, that sometimes the most important service happens in shadows, and that honor doesn't always come with recognition. You're learning, Colonel. I'm trying, Chief. 6 months after the ceremony, my father did something that surprised everyone. At Dylan's next promotion event, when people asked about his family, he said, I have 2 children in aerospace operations. One works openly, one works quietly. I'm proud of both of them. It wasn't the full truth, but it was honest truth. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I truly belonged in my own family's story. The reconciliation wasn't complete. It might never be. But understanding had replaced disappointment, and respect had replaced shame. It was enough. 1 year later, I stood in a different auditorium at Peterson Space Force Base, watching Dylan receive another commendation. But this time, I sat in the front row with my father and Patricia, no longer hiding in the shadows or pretending to be someone I wasn't. My new position allowed me to work more openly while maintaining necessary security protocols. I still couldn't discuss most of my operations, but I no longer had to pretend I stocked shelves for a living. The warehouse job had been replaced by a cover position as an aerospace consultant, close enough to the truth that I could sleep at night. After the ceremony, a young Space Force lieutenant approached me. Chief Chen, I wanted to thank you. My sister is considering leaving the academy because she thinks military service means choosing between family and duty. Your story helped her understand that sometimes service requires sacrifice, but it doesn't mean abandoning the people you love. I thought about Maya, the warehouse worker, the daughter who'd let her family think she'd failed rather than risk compromising national security. That version of me had died the day Colonel Shaw called my name in this auditorium. But she'd served her purpose. Tell your sister that strength isn't always visible, I said to the lieutenant. Sometimes the most important work happens when no one is watching, and sometimes the greatest honor comes without recognition. My father overheard the conversation. Later, as we walked to the parking lot, he said something that surprised me. I've been thinking about all the young officers I commanded over the years, who struggled with assignments I couldn't understand. I wonder how many of them were carrying burdens I never recognized. Probably more than you think, Dad. I want to be better at seeing strength that doesn't announce itself. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, larger, brighter, but still modest, and wrote in a journal I'd started keeping since my cover was blown. The entry was brief. Some people serve in uniforms that announce their dedication. Others serve in shadows that hide their sacrifice. Both kinds of service matter. Both require courage. The difference is that one seeks recognition, while the other surrenders it. For 10 years, I let my family think I'd failed because protecting them meant more than protecting my pride. I learned that love sometimes looks like disappointment, and that honor doesn't always wear medals. I don't need the world to know my name or understand my sacrifices. But I needed my family to know that their disappointment was built on necessity, not failure. Recognition is nice, but it was never the point. The point was the work itself. The missions completed in darkness. The conflicts prevented before they could begin. The privilege of serving something larger than personal pride. Some stories end with vindication, others end with understanding. Mine ended with both, and that's more than most people get. My name is Marcus Chen. I am someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's space operations chief. I am all of these things, and I am enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.